This sour liquid killed a Roman legion, dissolved a queen's fortune, and buried whole plague towns in silence. You still keep a bottle in your kitchen. For 10,000 years, vinegar has been humanity's quietest weapon. It cleaned wounds on battlefields from Gaul to Galilee, and cured fevers when no one understood infection. Mixed with the wrong metal, it poisoned emperors in their own dining halls. Silent, invisible, unstoppable. Picture it now. Glowing amber inside a Roman amphora, catching a single shaft of afternoon light. Harmless. Ordinary. But older than almost every civilization you can name. To understand the killing, you must start with the spoilage. Vinegar is, quite simply, wine that failed. Leave an open jar of grape juice in a warm room. Invisible bacteria drift in on warm air. Eat the alcohol, exhale acid. Sweet turns sharp, wine turns antiseptic. The French gave it the name we still use, vinaigre, sour wine, a quiet confession. An admission the vintner had lost the battle to something older, hungrier, and infinitely more patient than himself. Yet every fermenting culture on earth found this same failure. The Chinese from rice, the Persians from dates, the Greeks and Romans from grapes, the Anglo-Saxons from apples and honey, the Aztecs from pineapple and agave. Wherever humans stored a sugary liquid, vinegar arrived uninvited. The household chemist, the poor man's quiet medicine. One jar could preserve a summer's harvest, dress a wound, tan a hide, or scour a floor clean. But here's the thing. A spoilage byproduct doesn't become sacred by accident. Priests blessed it. Emperors rationed it. Physicians prescribed it. Assassins measured it out in careful drops. A mistake humanity refused to throw away. 10,000 years ago, between the Tigris and Euphrates, a Mesopotamian farmer forgot a clay vessel of date wine. Days passed. Weeks. When the lid came off, the drink had turned, biting the tongue, stinging the nose. Most would have poured it into the dirt. Someone, whose name we'll never know, tasted it and kept it. Babylonian clay tablets, pressed with wedge-shaped cuneiform script, list vinegar among the essential goods of every household. Used to pickle vegetables, preserve fish, and soften tough grain, vinegar became the quiet backbone of ancient cuisine. In Egyptian tombs sealed for 4,000 years, archaeologists have found vinegar residue clinging inside narrow-necked funerary jars. It traveled with the dead into the afterlife. Believe it or not, this humble sour liquid was that important. And then came the legend of Cleopatra, last pharaoh of Egypt, and a wager with Mark Antony. She bet she could consume the most expensive meal in history at a single sitting. And she was serious. She removed a giant pearl earring, dropped it into a cup of vinegar, and drank as it slowly dissolved. Whether it truly happened, historians still argue. But the tale endured because everyone knew what vinegar could do. It ate through metal. It softened bone. Quietly, patiently, this sour liquid undid the world around it. The Sumerians, older still, left the first recorded medical use. Vinegar poured directly into open wounds to prevent them from turning black. They knew nothing of bacteria. They only knew that it worked. From accident vinegar quietly became the trusted drink of soldiers. The Roman legion marched on vinegar. Not wine, not beer, but a thin, sour ration the soldiers called posca. Vinegar cut with water, sometimes flavored with wild herbs. It was cheap, portable, and refused to spoil in brutal summer heat. Above all, its acid killed the microbes that turned muddy river water into dysentery across every campaign the legions fought. A legionary crossing the Alps or the Sahara carried posca in a leather flask, and it kept him alive. For 4 centuries, this humble, sour drink quietly powered the largest, longest empire the Western world had ever seen. Meanwhile, in Greece, a physician named Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, was already prescribing vinegar for coughs and fevers. He mixed it with wild honey and called the golden concoction oxymel. He poured it neat over ulcers to clean them. His patients drank it, gargled with it, and inhaled its sharp vapors deep into aching lungs and rattling throats. 2,500 years later, doctors rediscovered, with genuine surprise, that acetic acid truly suppresses bacterial growth on wounds. Hippocrates, without microscope or theory, simply knew. Half a world away, Han China was building its own vinegar pharmacopoeia. Court physicians blended rice vinegar with plum, ginger, and root herbs. They believed it moved blood and calmed the liver. The Old Testament of the Hebrews mentions vinegar as both a bitter drink of hardship and a sacred ritual purifier. It was traded like salt along the Silk Road, carried in sealed jars from Chang'an all the way to Damascus. In some cities, medicinal vinegar aged for decades was worth its weight in gold. Then came the twist that made it holy. On a hill outside Jerusalem, a Roman soldier lifted a sponge soaked in vinegar to the lips of a dying man above. For centuries, Christian tradition read the gesture as pure mockery, a final insult, sour wine offered to a thirsting king. But scholars now believe otherwise. That sponge was almost certainly dipped in posca, the ordinary legionary's daily field ration. What the soldier held up was not a jeer at all. It was his own canteen, an act of rough battlefield mercy. That single moment reframed vinegar across 1,000 years of devout Christian imagination, echoing through every European chapel and cloister. It appeared in stained glass. It hung on cathedral walls. It was painted by masters from Giotto to Caravaggio himself. The humble drink of Roman infantry became a sacred relic of the Passion. Little did they know how deep reverence would go. In the Islamic world, a hadith praised vinegar as blessed, calling it the finest of condiments in any faithful household. It declared that no house holding vinegar within its walls should ever be considered truly poor by its faithful neighbors. Across medieval Europe, quiet monasteries became the great vinegar breweries of the age, tended by silent-robed hands. Monks stored barrels in cool stone cellars, tended fermentation for years, and sold the finished acid to apothecaries and dyers. In the Benedictine tradition, vinegar was used to reverently wash sacred vessels upon the altar before every solemn Mass. Sacred liquid was hiding inside every kitchen. But sanctity soon met catastrophe in the plague-ridden alleys of Europe. The Black Death arrived in the 14th century and killed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire continent. Physicians in beaked masks, those long bird-like hoods from every horror illustration, stuffed the beak with pungent herbs. They soaked cloth in vinegar, believing the sharp acid would filter the poisoned miasma of air rising from the dead. They were wrong about the cause, but they were far closer than they ever knew about the true cure. Acetic acid, sprayed on surfaces and hands, does in fact reduce the transmission of many dangerous pathogens, even today. From those dark years came the most enduring vinegar legend in Europe. 4 thieves, so the story goes, were captured in Marseille. They had been robbing plague corpses without falling sick. In exchange for their lives, they surrendered their secret recipe to authorities. A vinegar steeped with garlic, wormwood, rosemary, sage, and camphor. They rubbed it on skin, drank it, walked untouched among dying. 4 Thieves vinegar was still sold in French pharmacies well into the 19th century, its label whispering of that dark bargain. By the 17th century, the city of Orléans had industrialized the trade, turning humble vinegar into a jealously protected French craft. The Orléans method aged wine vinegar in oak casks for months, feeding a mother culture that produced smoother, more consistent product. Guilds jealously guarded the technique. Kings issued royal patents. Vinegar makers rose into the middle classes on a single humble condiment. When European ships sailed for the New World, barrels of vinegar sailed with them, tucked among ropes, salted meat, and iron nails. Sailors mixed it into water to keep the barrels sweet. They rinsed the decks after storms and fought rot in dark holds. They dosed the sick with it against scurvy, believe it or not, long before anyone understood the hidden power of vitamin C. And in 1864, a French chemist named Louis Pasteur peered through his microscope and finally saw what had been happening. Tiny, rod-shaped bacteria feeding on alcohol, exhaling acid. 10,000 years of mystery resolved in a single afternoon of lamplight. But here's the thing. The very same jar that had healed and preserved also concealed a killer waiting patiently within. For centuries, Romans adored a sweet syrup called sapa, made by boiling grape must in lead pots for hours. The grape acids leached the lead into the syrup, creating a thick sauce with the mellow brightness of caramel. It flavored their wine, it sweetened their cakes, it preserved their fruit, and it slowly poisoned their aristocracy. Historians argue the trembling hands, sudden rages, and gout-crippling senates trace back to constant intake of lead-sweetened vinegar. Whole villas of amphorae were unearthed, glazed with residue. Saturnine gout, they called it, a disease of the rich. For centuries, they thought luxury blessed them. But here's the thing. That same luxury was quietly killing them all. The story did not end with Rome. In Victorian London, merchants cut vinegar with sulfuric acid and wood alcohol. They bottled it with beautiful labels. Working families sprinkled it on fish and chips, slowly poisoning themselves for pennies. There were mass outbreaks, parliamentary inquiries, and still it continued. Because vinegar was cheap and adulteration was cheaper still. Concentrated acetic acid, the glacial form, nearly pure, became a favored tool of 19th century suicides and murderers. It burned throats, it ate stomachs, it killed within hours, leaving a trail early forensic science struggled to trace. The condiment on your dinner table quietly killed thousands in kitchens across Europe, without a single newspaper headline. Yet from that horror, from those poisoned working families, rose the modern industry we still trust today. In the small Italian town of Modena, families aged vinegar for generations in a slow, patient ritual. They cooked down local Trebbiano grape must, poured it into wooden barrels of oak, chestnut, cherry, mulberry, juniper. They let it evaporate and concentrate for 12, 25, sometimes 100 slow and patient years. What emerged was black and syrupy and impossibly complex. Balsamic vinegar, worth its weight in liquid gold. It was sold by the single drop, given as a dowry, willed to grandchildren like a precious heirloom. In the 20th century, apple cider vinegar became the darling of a new kind of medicine cabinet. Folk healers in Vermont swore by it. Naturopaths bottled it. Believe it or not, wellness had returned. Today, it's a billion-dollar industry. Gummies, capsules, glossy bottles promising to burn fat, lower sugar, cleanse the liver. The science is mixed. The marketing is not. But here's the thing. Look around your own kitchen. Vinegar hides in your pickles, ketchup, mayonnaise, mustard, salad dressing. It is the acid in your bread starter. It is the tang in your sauce, the acid in over-the-counter eardrops, in athletes' foot sprays. It appears in mild antiseptics some hospitals still trust on burn wounds, when even modern antibiotics quietly fail. As households turned from harsh industrial cleaners, the humble white vinegar jug returned to its oldest job. Cutting grease, killing mildew, scouring glass. Quiet chemistry your great-grandmother trusted long before any chemist arrived. The green cleaning revival is, in truth, the oldest cleaning tradition our entire species has ever known. One sour liquid, 10,000 years of quiet power. And this, believe it or not, changed everything. Think about what that jar in your cupboard actually is. A chemistry lesson older than the pyramids. It is the first thing our ancestors made without meaning to, born from an accident of spoilage. Spoilage, the enemy of every farmer, cook, and merchant, turned out, in this case, a gift. The very bacteria that ruined the wine also saved the wound, cleaned the well, preserved winter cabbage. That same souring lit the lamps of medieval monasteries, a hidden chemistry working faithfully under warm candlelight. The same humble jar was both sacred and lethal, a strange paradox riding quietly through every century. This jar rode into battle with Roman legions and stood on the shelves of Renaissance apothecaries alike. It hung from the belts of plague doctors and sweetened the poisoned tables of paranoid Renaissance emperors. It is the perfect emblem of how ordinary objects quietly carry buried and forgotten layers of history. You cannot walk through your own kitchen without brushing past 10,000 years of human trial and error. The bottle on your shelf is an artifact. It just happens to still work in your hand. Next, another humble kitchen staple with a far darker past waits quietly beside it on your shelf. If this changed how you see the bottle in your cupboard, imagine what the next one will do. Next week, we uncover the salt that toppled empires, the crystal that funded ancient standing armies. This same crystal sparked revolutions and paid the wages of every Roman legionary marching across the empire. Subscribe now for weekly videos about the incredible hidden history of food, cooking, and everyday kitchen ingredients. Tell me in the comments how vinegar quietly shows up in your own family kitchen and traditions. The pickles a grandmother made, the folk remedy an aunt swore by, the cleaning trick mother refused. Every household carries a vinegar story worth telling. I want to hear yours in the comments. Hit subscribe now so the next incredible story